World of Warcraft is the home to many stories based on many events. Whether they be spoken about a hero rallying his allies in order to save Azeroth from a rising threat, or whether the stories are told of a warrior that has walked the path of damnation and becoming the very last thing that he swore to destroy, we have seen, all of us, a number of sad stories, tragic stories, and even dark stories within the World of Warcraft. And that is why in today's video, I am here to share with you all 10 tragic lore facts within the World of Warcraft. At some point shortly before the War of the Ancients, Neltharion created the Demon Soul in order to combat the invading forces of the Burning Legion. What the other dragon aspects did not know, however, was that Neltharion also wished to use the artifact to have complete dominion over the other Dragonflights. However, during an accidental cave-in, a scale was torn off of Deathwing's body and landed on the Demon Soul, which damaged it. Neltharion soon discovered that something so small as even a scale of his own could potentially be enough to damage the Demon Soul, let alone destroy it. With great care, the dragon aspect protected the artifact until it was finally ready to be unleashed upon his fellow Dragonflights. Neltharion's corruption, however, was not known to the other Dragonflights until it was far too late. As the aspects and their Dragonflights flew towards Zinajati, where the Night Elves held the Legion at bay, they stood by and waited for Neltharion to lead the attack. It was then that the Black Dragon revealed his corruption and insanity. By channeling his power into the artifact, the Destroyer wiped out a legion of demons with a single swing of radiant magic, but he did not stop there, for there was no limits to his unending fury. Neltharion also used the Demon Soul to kill hundreds of Night Elves that were also engaging the minions of the Burning Legion. Horrified by the act of Neltharion, Malygos commanded his blue Dragonflight to surround Deathwing in an attempt to take the Demon Soul away from him. But with a swing of the artifact, Deathwing single-handedly destroyed nearly all of the blue drakes, crippling the blue Dragonflight. In Ulduar, a Titan complex serving as a prison to the old god Yogg-Saron, players enter the raid in an attempt to quell the threat of the Old One emerging from his prison. The heroes of the northern counteroffensive that enter Yogg-Saron's mind can see 3 possible visions. These 3 visions represented key moments within the history of Azeroth. One vision revealed the dragon aspects coming together during the War of the Ancients approximately more than 10,000 years ago in order to forge the Demon Soul. Another vision was King Lane's assassination by Garona Half-Orcan, which played a huge factor in the fall of Stormwind during the First War. And the final vision revealed the Lich King mercilessly torturing Bolvar Fordraken after the events of the Wrathgate. The conversation between the Paladin and the Death Knight then plays out like this.
I am not afraid of you! Your resilience is admirable. I will break you as I broke him.
When Arthas says, "I will break you as I broke him," he is referring to Dranosh Sourfang, the Horde commander at Angrathar that had been raised in Undeath to serve the Scourge. This can be proven because as soon as he says this, players can see a silhouette of Dranosh appearing next to the Lord of Undeath. Some people also believe that since these visions were revealed to the players during the encounter, that Yogg-Saron may have something to do with influencing these events. Sindragosa is known by many as the mighty Frostworm who was raised by the Lich King himself at Sindragosa's fall in Icecrown. However, many people do not know of Sindragosa's tragic past. During the War of the Ancients, as Deathwing used the Demon Soul to eradicate numerous demons and Night Elves, Sindragosa was one of the first blue dragons under Malygos' command to engage the Earth Warder. As the corrupted aspect turned on his brethren and unleashed the might of the Demon Soul upon them, Malygos narrowly managed to raise a spell fast enough to protect himself and a handful of other blue dragons that were lucky enough to reach the safety of his barrier. Sindragosa was not one of these dragons. The blast from the artifact hurled Sindragosa far across the world into the frozen north. Wounded and crippled, she sought desperately to reach Dragonflight, the graveyard of the dragons. However, the power of the artifact was great, and because she was critically injured, Sindragosa was unable to fly and plummeted into the region of Icecrown. Calling on her husband for aid, she received nothing but the reply of the howling Arctic wind. Her death played a huge factor in contributing to Malygos' insanity. After the events of the War of the Ancients and the Sundering, the world was difficult for the Trolls. The Trolls were met with famine, plague, and terror, which caused them to become desperate for aid. the Gurubashi trolls sought aid from ancient mystical forces and eventually fell under the sway of the darkest primitive god. Hakkar, the Soul Flayer, was this god, this savior of their people. Although he heard the trolls call for aid and rescued them from their state of agony, he demanded compensation for his efforts. The god demanded souls to be sacrificed to him daily, and he dreamed of gaining access to the physical world of mortals so that he could devour the blood of all creatures. The presence of Hakkar created the Yautalai, who were an extremist tribe that existed solely to please and serve the blood god, and they were willing to betray their own people in the process. The rest of the trolls, however, realized how much of a threat Hakkar would inevitably be if he were to succeed with his plans and decided to turn against him. The strongest of the tribes rose up together as brothers and sisters, and with their combined might, they waged war against both Hakkar and the Yautalai. Although the terrible war that ensued between the two factions is spoken of only in whispers, the battle concluded with the trolls destroying Hakkar's avatar and banishing him from the world. The blood god's priests, the Yautalai, were either executed or driven from Zul'Gurub and forced to survive in the uncharted swamplands of the north. Although the priests were defeated and exiled, they inevitably survived the harsh land and erected a temple in reverence to Hakkar where they could prepare for his arrival into the physical world. This temple was the Temple of Atal Hakkar. Unknown to many was the War of the Spider. The War of the Spider was a war between the Nerubian Empire of Ahn'kahet and the Zhol-Neruban Northrend against Ner'zhul's undead army. The war began when the Nerubian Spider Lords sent their elite forces to attack the frozen region of Icecrown after discovering that the Lich King was extending his influence over the entire continent of Northrend and in turn proving to be a serious threat to the Nerubian Empire. The Spider Lords commanded vast legions and had an underground network that stretched nearly half of the continent, which allowed them to organize many hit-and-run tactics against Ner'zhul's undead empire, which made it nearly impossible for him to root them out. In addition to this, Ner'zhul eventually discovered that the Nerubians were not only immune to his undead plague, but also to his telepathic domination powers as well, which gave the Nerubians a great advantage over him. However, among all of this, he also learned that they were not immune from being raised in undeath to serve the former shaman's will. Initially, the Nerubians had the upper hand, being immune to the former elder shaman's powers, plague of undeath, and even managing to avoid his armies from rooting them out. But in time, Ner'zhul's war against the Spider Lords was eventually won by attrition. With the help of the Dreadlords and the legion of undead Scourge warriors, the Lich King invaded Zhol-Nerub, which caused the Nerubians to dig deeper underground in order to seek refuge from the undead onslaught. However, this would prove to be a grave mistake, which would result in their undoing. Upon digging deeper, the Spider Lords encountered the malevolent Faceless Ones, who immediately attacked the Nerubians, which thus forced the Spider Lords to fight a war on two fronts, therefore depleting much of their resources. In time, the Nerubian Empire was crippled, which allowed the Lich King to exterminate the remaining living Spider Lords and raise them in undeath to serve as he willed. Cigar the Red, also known as Brox, was a veteran orc warrior, well-known war hero, and the only known mortal that has ever physically wounded the Burning Legion's leader, Sargeras himself. Brox was caught in a temporal anomaly in the Stone Talon Mountains that sent him back 10,000 years ago into the events of the Well of Eternity. Although he was initially thought to be an enemy and captured by the Moon Guard, he was later released by the kind priestess Tyrande, who gave him food and healed his injuries while he was in captivity. Upon his capture, Brox's axe was taken from him, which required the battle-hardened orc to wield a new weapon. Perhaps a new weapon that would meet his standards. And meet his standards it did. Malfurion, under the demigod Cenarius' direction, created a mystical axe of wood that had the sharpness and density of a diamond. In the orc's hand, this weapon would be the death of thousands of demons. At the final battle over the Well of Eternity, Brox realized that if the world and his future were to be saved, his companions would need more time and he would need to sacrifice himself for the greater good in order to do this. The orc leapt from the back of one of the red dragons and passed through a funnel which delivered him directly into the realm of the Legion. Once he arrived, he immediately, without hesitation, began slaughtering every demon within his way, which in turn blocked their advance towards the portal. He eventually killed so many of the Legion soldiers with such ease that he eventually stood atop a hill of their own bodies. Cigar even at one point mocked the Burning Legion, taunting for more of them to come and challenge him, for none of them could withstand his unbridled fury. None but one. Sargeras, Lord of the Legion, came personally to put an end to the orc's life, But Cigar, fearless and devoted to saving his companions, swung his axe at the fallen titan, which struck a small wound in Sargeras' leg. Although the fallen titan inevitably defeated the orc, Cigar died not a mere honorable death, but was struck down in a blaze of glory, nearly unheard of in all orcish history. From the moment of Lilian Voss's birth, she was raised by her father and her peers as a weapon against all who would oppose the Scarlet Crusade. Her devoutness to her duties and the urge she had to please her father resulted in her studying in stealth, sorcery, martial arts, and the ways of a warrior. Her love for her father and her commitment to the Scarlet Crusade resulted in her not having any childhood whatsoever. Sometime after this, however, she died from sources that are not clearly stated and was raised by the Forsaken's Valkyr under the command of Sylvanas Windrunner in order to be recruited into their ranks. However, upon resurrection, Voss was horrified by her undead appearance and ran away in a deep state of denial, claiming that her father would protect her despite her no longer being quote-unquote alive. She is soon after found by novice Elrith and Deathnell, who gives the Forsaken player a hand mirror to show Lilian her appearance, hoping that she would come to her senses and see that the Forsaken would be the only place where she would be accepted. When she saw her own face in the mirror, however, she ran away, calling for her father and denying her life as an undead abomination. Shortly after, however, she was captured by the Scarlet Crusade and imprisoned. Lieutenant Gebler, supposedly a friend from her past, brings word from her father. Gebler announced that whereas her father had viewed her as a weapon against his enemies in life, he now sees her as a wretched abomination in death and has disowned her as a daughter and instead has ordered her execution. Voss, who was completely horrified and enraged by her father's response to her death, instantly kills the lieutenant and orders the Forsaken adventurer to leave her be. Her only purpose now is to seek complete retribution against her father and all of the Scarlet Crusade. It should also be noted that Lilian Voss is the Hooded Crusader within the Scarlet Monastery. Shortly before the siege of Shattrath, the power-hungry Orc Gul'dan called all of the Orcish clans to the throne of Kil'jaeden in order to drink the blood of the Pit Lord Manaroth. Unknown to Gul'dan was that his former mentor Ner'zhul warned Durotan of the dangers of accepting this gift, which resulted in Durotan, the Frostwolf clan, and Orgrim Doomhammer denying the demon blood, which caused all of the other orcs and Gul'dan to become highly suspicious of them and their future activities. Gul'dan even went so far as to try and eliminate Durotan by freeing one of Blackhand's Draenei slaves and blaming it on the Frostwolf chieftain. Blackhand, enraged at Durotan, challenged him to a Mak'gora, but the duel eventually became a stalemate when both orcs realized that the Draenei prisoner had left in the midst of battle. Seeing the conflict as meaningless since the prisoner had escaped, both orcs ended the duel, causing Gul'dan's plan to fail. After the fall of Shattrath and the mysterious disappearance of Kil'jaeden, the Horde began to construct a gateway in order to set up a portal between Draenor and Azeroth. Durotan and his clan continued to voice opposition against the Horde leadership, which resulted in Gul'dan exiling Durotan and his entire clan. Accepting their fate, Durotan, his wife Draka, and the Frostwolf clan settled deep in the Altrak Mountains, where they lived throughout the First War and had their only son Thrall. Realizing that he wanted a better world for his son, Durotan decided to take action against Gul'dan and travel to the encampment of the only other orc who has ever stood by him, Orgrim Doomhammer. At this time, Doomhammer had already assassinated Blackhand and had took the mantle as the new war chief. As the new war chief, he welcomed Durotan and Draka into his encampment as old friends. Durotan explained everything he knew about Gul'dan to Doomhammer, and the war chief vowed that he would stand at Durotan's side as they confronted Gul'dan with his crimes. But for now, he must send Durotan and Draka away to a safe haven. The war chief assigned a few of his soldiers to escort Durotan and his kin to a safe place, but it was later discovered that several of Doomhammer's warriors that were accompanying the Frostwolf chieftain were actually Gul'dan's spies. The spies summoned assassins who killed Draka and mutilated Durotan by slicing off both of his arms to prevent him from ever holding his child again. As Durotan slowly bled out, his last thoughts in his mind came as a relief to him, that he would not see his own son torn apart by the creatures of the forest. Thrall, otherwise known as Goel, or the son of Durotan, was the war chief of the restored Orcish Horde and the ruler of Durotar in Kalimdor. But he was not always a leader. As a baby, he was found amongst the bloody bodies of his murdered parents by Blackmore, a commander of the internment camps which held Orcish prisoners after the Second War. Blackmore bestowed the name Thrall upon the young orc, which translated to the word slave in the human tongue, and raised him as a gladiator with all of the savagery of an orc but with the strategic intellect of a human. Though Thrall was an excellent fighter and extremely resilient, Blackmore's abusive beatings began to take their toll. Eventually, Thrall met a human woman named Taretha Foxton, and the two became very close friends even despite their major differences. They began to write to each other and talk behind Blackmore's back, and eventually, Thrall stated to Taretha that he wished to escape from Durenhold. Taretha agreed with her orc friend that Blackmore's treatment of his prisoners were cruel and dishonorable and agreed to help the young orc escape. She then created a diversion inside the keep, which allowed Thrall to escape from his cell unnoticed. After escaping, they met outside the fortress by a cave, where Taretha gave him provisions and supplies. Goel then left Blackmore, Taretha, and Durenhold, vowing that he would never return. Much time has passed, and eventually Thrall was taught what it truly meant to be an honorable orc. He had sought out Grommash Hellscream himself, and learned the tongue of his people. He met the wise shaman Drekthar, who taught Thrall the old ways of the Horde before Gul'dan's corruption, and he had inherited the mantle of War Chief among Doomhammer's death. With his first action as War Chief, Thrall attacked Durenhold in an effort to dismantle the entire internment camp system. Before the attack, however, he met secretly with Taretha, asking her to leave Durenhold with her family, but she refused, hoping it would never come to battle and fearful of the consequences if Blackmore noticed her missing. When Thrall arrived with the Horde at his command, he confronted Blackmore, who was drunk out of his mind, and asked the human for a peaceful resolution. Blackmore, however, responded by tossing the severed head of Taretha into the courtyard, screaming that this was the fate of all traitors. Thrall, enraged at the fate of his close friend, ordered the orcs to lay siege to the internment camp. Among the midst of battle, Thrall cornered Blackmore in a hidden tunnel and bested him in combat. When Blackmore tried to explain his actions and asked for Thrall's aid to help him subjugate the Alliance, the War Chief's rage at Taretha's fate broke all barriers and he struck Blackmore down. As he lay there dying, Blackmore expressed pride in what Thrall had become and what Blackmore claimed credit for making him into. After Arthas made his glorious return, the lands of Lordaeron sung praise at the miraculous appearance of their prince and heir to the throne. However, he was not the so-called hero that they recalled him to be. When Arthas traveled to the frozen north in order to exact his revenge on Mal'Ganis, he found a cursed rune blade known as Frostmourne. After succumbing to the whispers of Frostmourne, the former paladin murdered an entire regiment of soldiers that had helped him defeat Mal'Ganis, including both of his highest-ranking captains, Captain Falaric and Captain Marwyn. When the fallen paladin returned back to his kingdom, they stood at his side and watched as Arthas personally murdered his own father, which broke the stability within Lordaeron. Arthas then tasked both of the former Alliance captains with the duty of slaying the citizens of the city and raising them into undeath as well with their newly gained powers. Falaric and Marwyn are the two captains that encounter the soldiers of the Northrend counteroffensive as they make their way into the Halls of Reflection.